Hello. Welcome back to Snugglewood, young Dreamlynx. My name is Irene. Snuggle down into your coziest quilt and let tonight's calming tale and soothing sounds relieve you of any worries and guide you towards a deep, restful night's sleep under these beautiful stars above. And so our story begins in a place called Dolphin Bay and the sleepy giant tale of coastal treasures. Dolphin Bay rested in a wide arc of coastline where the sea and land joined in quiet accord. Golden sands stretched in long sweeps, edged by dunes, topped with grasses that moved in the breeze, and wildflowers whose scents mingled with the salt air. The waters approached the shore in measured rolls, each one depositing a fresh line of treasures drawn from distant depths. This stretch of shore formed a realm of quiet discovery, where the ocean's steady flow offered gifts that invited close attention and calm presence. Legends told of a time when the towering guardian of the coast roamed these shores. The sleepy giant, whose steps had once shaped the curve of the bay, and those hands could guide the tides. The giant had carried a heavy heart through endless travels, seeking solace amid the vast waters. In one such journey, the guardian paused at the water's edge, resting among the first treasures washed ashore. There, amid the shells and stones, a deep ease settled over the giant for the first time in many seasons. Years passed, and the essence of that presence blended with the bay's offerings, leaving behind a legacy that the shore still carried. The treasures were no ordinary finds. They held a warmth that eased the spirit and reminded those who gathered them of the steady watch kept by the distant guardian, whose silhouette sometimes appeared on the far cliffs, a silent protector of the land. The bay welcomed visitors who came in search of its offerings, though only those drawn by an inner call found the richest spots. Townsfolk spoke of how the treasures brought clarity when thoughts grew tangled, and comfort when days felt long. Many returned home with pockets filled and hearts lighter, carrying stories of how a single shell or stone could shift the weight of worry into something softer. Among those who walked the shores often was a young woman named Elowen. She lived in the nearby hamlet and spent her days helping tend the gardens and listening to the tales of travellers. Elowen possessed a curious heart that found joy in small wonders. Yet she sometimes felt the pull of unrest when the world moved too quickly around her. She came to the bay whenever the call grew strong, following the path that led down from the dunes to the water's edge. Elowen did not seek to understand every mystery of the place. She simply allowed the shore to unfold before her, one step at a time. On this day, the sun hung low and warm, casting long patterns across the sand. Elowen stepped onto the beach, the grains shifting beneath her feet with a pleasant give. She began her slow walk northward along the main stretch of the shore, where the sand lay smooth and wide. The first treasures appeared almost at once. A row of shells left by the last wave. She paused and knelt, lifting a spiral conch whose surface felt cool and ridged under her fingers. Its colour turned from pale cream to soft rose, echoing the hues of dawn skies remembered from childhood. Holding it close, she noticed how the weight rested lightly in her palm, a small anchor that steadied her breathing. A sense of belonging settled as she slipped the shell into her satchel, knowing it would rest safely beside her later. Further along the sand opened into a much wider view, dotted with driftwood worn smooth by years of travel. Elowen continued her tour, the air carrying the clean scent of salt and sand. She spotted a cluster of rounded stones nestled in a shallow dip. One caught her eye, a smooth pebble of deep amber, streaked with thin lines of ivory. She picked it up and turned it slowly, feeling the polished surface that the waves had shaped over countless seasons. The stone fit perfectly in her hand, its warmth seeping through her skin and easing the tension that sometimes lingered in her shoulders. A quiet affirmation rose within her. Here, each moment arrived exactly as needed, and peace could be gathered like these simple gifts. As she moved onward, a group of tidekin appeared near the waterline. These small creatures, no larger than her hand, had rounded bodies covered in patterns that matched the shells around them. They scurried with quick, purposeful movements, nudging stray pebbles and fragments toward the dry sand where collectors might notice them. One tidekin paused and looked toward Elowen with bright eyes before resuming its work. She smiled and watched as the creature rolled a tiny rock free of wet sand, revealing a treasure she might have missed. A flat stone etched with natural grooves that formed a swirling pattern like the bay's own curve. She added it to her collection. The Tidekin's helpful presence, adding a layer of shared wonder to her walk. The two led Elowen toward the first rocky outcrop, where the sand gave way to clusters of stones rising from the shore. Here the waves met the rocks with a steady wash, creating small hollows that held pooled water. She stepped carefully among the formations, the surfaces firm and cool beneath her soles. In one hollow she discovered a collection of larger rocks, their colours ranging from slate grey to warm ochre. One rock in particular drew her. A piece of quartz veined with threads of silver that caught the light without any harsh glare. She lifted it with both hands, its solid weight grounding her fully in the present. The rock's texture, smooth in places, lightly textured in others, invited her fingers to trace its lines, each pass bringing a deeper sense of steadiness. She placed it in her satchel beside the others, feeling how the growing collection balanced lightly against her side. Nearby, a pair of shell wardens emerged from a large conch, half buried in the sand. These tiny beings lived within the shells, their forms blending so well with the surroundings that they appeared only when they chose to be seen. One shell warden peeked out and offered a soft trill, a sound like distant water flowing over pebbles. Elowen knelt lower to observe without disturbing them. The creatures busied themselves, arranging smaller fragments inside their home. Creating shapes and patterns that mirrored the treasures outside. Their quiet industry reminded her that every corner of the bay held its own pace, one that continued whether observed or not. She left a small shell she had found earlier near the conch as a gesture of thanks, then continued her path along the outcrop. The shoreline curved gently into a series of tide pools, each one a miniature world revealed by the receding water. Elowen approached the first pool, its surface clear and still. Tiny fish darted among the fronds of seaweed, and clusters of anemones waved their frills in the current. She leaned closer, the salt scent stronger here. In the shallows lay an array of small shells in shades of coral and ivy, some still attached to strands of kelp. She reached in and lifted a delicate bivalve, its two halves joined by a thin hinge that opened with the lightest touch. Inside rested a pearl-like bead formed by the sea's patient work. The find felt like a secret shared only with her, and she slipped it into a separate pouch within her satchel. Its being added a note of quiet delight. Moving from pool to pool, she noted how each held its own assortment. One contained rocks worn into perfect ovals. Another held fragments of coral, shaped like tiny branches. She collected a few more pieces, each addition building a sense of completeness within her. The water lapped at the pool edges in soft, repeating sounds that matched the pace of her steps. A flock of wave-weft birds flew overhead, their wings catching the light as they called to one another in melodic notes that carried across the bay. Their flight wove new lines above the pools, guiding her eyes to a spot she had not yet noticed. A larger pool tucked behind a low rock ledge. There, half submerged, rested an unusual rock formation. A cluster of stones fused together by the action of the waves into a single piece that resembled a small map of the coastline. Elowen carefully lifted the formation, its surface still damp and cool. The piece felt substantial, yet balanced, as though it had waited for the right moment to be found. Holding it brought a wave of warmth through her chest, the kind that arrives when one realizes the world offers exactly what is needed without demand. She added it to her collection, the weight now a comforting presence against her body. The tour continued past the pools toward a hidden cove, accessible only at low tide. Elowen followed the narrow path between two rocky arms. The sand here finer and marked with the footprints of earlier visitors, both Dreamlynx and creature. The cove opened like a secret room, its walls of stone rising in layered bands of colour. The water here was calmer, reflecting the sky in unbroken sheets. Scattered along the inner shore lay the rarest treasures yet. Long strands of driftwood polished to a satin finish. Clusters of shells in perfect spirals, and stones whose surfaces held embedded fossils of ancient sea life. She spent time examining each one, her fingers following the textures that told stories of long journeys through the ocean. One piece of driftwood curved like an open hand, its grain flowing in lines that invited rest. She lifted it and felt how it fit naturally in her grasp. The wood warm from the sun. Another shell, larger than her palm, bore a deep interior that echoed the sound of the waves when held to her ear. Not a hollow roar, but a steady reminder of the bay's own voice. She arranged a few of the finds on a flat rock, creating a small display that pleased her eye and settled her thoughts further. In the distance, the silhouette of the sleepy giant appeared once more against the horizon, standing watch over the cove as it had for ages. The presence felt protective rather than distant, a quiet assurance that the bay remained cared for, no matter the hour. Elowen paused in her collecting to simply stand and breathe with the rhythm of the waves, the air moving in and out in time with the water's approach and retreat. Each breath deepened the ease she carried. The treasures in her satchel, now symbols of connection rather than mere objects. She turned back along the cove's edge, retracing her steps with the same unhurried pace. The outgoing tide revealed new lines of offerings, and she stopped to gather a few more. A smooth green stone that fit perfectly in the curve of her thumb. A fragment of coral shaped like a tiny star. Each addition felt like an affirmation whispered by the shore itself. Peace arrives in layers, one small discovery at a time. And the heart grows lighter with every step taken in openness. As the afternoon light lengthened, Elowen reached the rocky outcrop once more. The tidekin had moved on, leaving fresh pebbles in neat rows, as if preparing for the next visitor. She smiled at their work and continued past the tide pools, where the wave-weft birds now rested on the ledges, their feathers fluffed against the breeze. The shell wardens had retreated into their conch, yet one small trill floated out as she passed, a farewell that carried warmth. The main sandy stretch welcomed her, the huge covering of sand now marked with her own footprints, leading both ways. She walked the final length toward the dune path, the satchel at her side, holding a collection that felt complete, yet open to future visits. The weight rested comfortably. each treasure a reminder of the bay's generosity and steady presence of the guardian who watched from afar. Elowen paused at the base of the dunes, turning to look back over the full sweep of Dolphin Bay. The waters continued their measured approach, leaving new lines of gifts for whoever might come next. The air held the same clean scent. The grasses on the dunes moved in the same breeze, and the distant silhouette of the sleepy giant remained a quiet constant on the horizon. She felt the day's discoveries settle within her like the treasures themselves, solid, beautiful, and ready to be carried forward. The bay remained exactly as it had been at the start of her tour. Yet something in the light seemed softer. The sounds of the waves more inviting. Elowen ascended the path through the dunes, the sand crumbling under her feet in a final gentle give. She carried the coastal treasures not as burdens, but as companions, each one a piece of the larger whole that included the ocean, the creatures, the guardian, and the quiet knowing that peace could always be found along this shore. Later, when the light faded and the stars appeared overhead, the treasures would rest on a shelf in her room, their surfaces catching the moonlight in soft shimmers. Elowen would recall the tour in vivid detail. The feel of the sand, the weight of the stones, the calls of the tidekin and wave weft, the steady roll of the waves, and the memory would ease her into rest. The bay's rhythm continuing in her thoughts, like a lullaby that never ended. The shore of Dolphin Bay stayed open for all who sought its gifts, the treasures renewing with every tide, and the sleepy giant keeping watch in the distance. Those who walked its length, like Elowen, left with more than they had carried in, a deeper sense of belonging, a lighter step, and the certain knowledge that the world offered its comforts in the simplest forms, shell by shell, stone by stone, moment by moment. The air in the cove held that same timeless quality long after Elowen had gone. Each wave continuing its work of polishing and revealing. Creatures moved along the waterline with unhurried purpose. The tidekin nudging stones, the shell wardens arranging their homes, the wave weft calling softly from the rocks. The treasures lay waiting for the next set of hands, each one ready to bring its own measure of calm to whoever paused long enough to notice. Elowen returned to the bay on other days, not because she needed to reclaim anything, but because the shore had become a place of quiet honouring. She would walk the same tour again, discovering new arrangements left by the tide, feeling the same textures and hearing the same steady sounds. Each visit layered another memory atop the last, creating a hub of comfort that extended beyond the sand and into her daily life. The connections grew, yet the feeling remained one of abundance rather than excess. Each addition affirming that enough was already present. Others began to follow the paths she had walked, drawn not by spoken directions, but by an indescribable pull toward the water's edge. They arrived alone or in small numbers, approaching the shore with open hands and quieter steps. Some sought particular colours of shell or certain shapes of stone. Others came simply to stand where the waves met the sand and let the rhythm work its way through them. Each left with treasures of their own and a shared sense that the bay held space for every heart that arrived ready to receive. The hidden cove, the tide pools, the rocky outcrops, and the long sandy stretch all continued their quiet work, shaped by the same forces that had drawn the sleepy giant long ago. The Guardian's presence remained a steady backdrop, neither demanding attention nor fading from view. The treasures kept arriving, polished and ready, carrying forward the essence of that ancient rest. In this way, the coastal treasures of Dolphin Bay wove themselves into the lives of those who walked the shore, offering their gifts without condition and reminding every visitor that peace could be gathered. One careful step at a time. One smooth stone at a time. One spiral shell at a time. Until the whole world felt held in balance, and the night's rest arrived as naturally as the tide. The story of the bay and its offerings unfolded endlessly. Each new day bringing fresh lines of discovery along the water's edge. Elowen and those like her continued their tours. Their satchels filling, and their spirits renewing with the same quiet certainty that the sleepy giant still watched, and the shore still provided. The treasures remained timeless and generous, waiting for the next set of hands to lift them, feel their weight, and carry home the calm they so willingly share.